Welcome back to Prestige Motorsports. So today we're going to talk about our quoting process. We've done videos like this in the past and we continue to move forward with that to bring clarity to our process that you go through from basically start to finish. So we're going to focus on the quoting process. It's very, very important that you provide as much information as possible, and that's what this video is all about, is to give you the tools so you know what information to provide us with. Mainly, the reason for all this is we have an abundance amount of emails. It's very hard to get back with everybody in a timely fashion, especially if we have to get on the phone. Now, I'm old school, so I like to talk to the customer, understand what they're trying to do, but we only have so much time in a day. We are increasing our sales staff on a daily basis, but this should help every bit of the process. So just bear with me. I'll try and keep this as short and sweet as possible, but give you the tools to provide us with the information so we can get you a quote and power your next ride. Okay, so we're going to jump right in. We're going to start with the base engine. So the base engine is what we start with as a core long block. And the reason for that is that way we can establish, does the guy want a small block Chevy, a big block Chevy, what kind of power range, what kind of characteristics do those power ranges have for the intended use and purpose of your vehicle. So I'll just jot down some numbers of base prices and highlight that these are complete from oil pan to the intake manifold. So 383 small block Chevy, 500 horsepower, base starting price is $58.99. Our 347 small block Ford, 500 horsepower, $65.99. 582 big block Chev 700 is $11,399, and our 416 LS3 with 600 horsepower long block, that is $89.99. Now, actually, don't quote me on that because I can't remember. But point here is we're going to start with a base price. Now, what we may modify in that base motor could be the type of valve covers. Most of our stuff's going to be a generic valve cover, cast aluminum, polished, or what have you. So if you want a GM valve cover or a Ford Racing valve cover, we'll upgrade to that. We will also substitute the oil pan depending on the application. So in Fords, we talk about a front sump versus a rear sump, and that's kind of the reason we ask a lot of the questions about your build. What kind of suspension are you using? That's primarily so we know what oil pan to choose. All right, so we're going to move on to the next group. And I want to just point out, I'm sorry, but the base motor does not come with an intake manifold. We used to do that, but the reason we don't now is for the reason of how I'm going to lay this out. So the next group of items that we pop on top of the motor is the fuel and ignition group. So this could be either carbureted or fuel injected. So we'll just write a few things down. What is that going to include? That's going to include our intake manifold. It's also going to include our carb or EFI. It'll include our distributor, our wires, and our custom looms. It's also going to include the ignition box, which is going to be like your 6AL. It'll have the ignition coil. We have a small hardware kit, and what that is basically a boot for your alternator so the charging wire doesn't strike an arc or start a fire. It has some of your coolant hoses as far as crossovers from your thermostat housing. So there's a lot of small ancillary items in this little kit. And then the last thing is going to be dyno testing. Basically, we also took that out of the base engine pricing primarily because now we have the groups of components to actually dyno test the engine. Now, I'll take this just a little bit further. On the LS, we have basically broke it down to these items, but when it comes to the ignition coils, there's so many options in LS land. So basically we have a valve cover and coil option. One could be basically a smooth, we'll call it, smooth valve cover with remote coils. Guys don't want to see them. The other option is going to be basically a valve cover with coil mounts. And again, there's so many options out there. So in the LS land, we'll break it down to a fuel and ignition group of items for this portion, and then for the valve cover and coil packs. Just to give you an idea of pricing, so we can kind of follow this as we go through, let's just say traditional small block Ford, we want a carbureted package. So the carb package, roughly speaking, with all these items, is $2,500. If we're talking EFI, we are going to talk about that. We will have a video that explain a lot more detail why we really stay away from throttle body injection. Multi-point injection is the way you need to go, and that video will explain all of that. So basically, if we're adding EFI, we're talking $4,500. And consequently, really $2,000 upgrade to EFI is legitimate and respectable for a good EFI system. Otherwise, it's not even worth doing it. Stick with a carburetor. So we'll move on to the next group. All right, so the next group item is going to be the pulley kit. So pulley kit and accessories. What do we need to know? Well, we need to know, obviously, you're probably going to run an alternator. Are you going to run a water pump? Are you going to run, it could be electric or mechanical. Then we get into basically power steering and AC. So tell us what you're running. If it's just an alternator and water pump only, is it power steering with AC? That's going to change a lot about the pulley kit we select. Now, I've mentioned this prior too, is we select pulley kits a lot of times based on fitment. Okay, secondary to that is style and of course quality, but it's mainly about fitment. And I'll roll back to Fords, Mustangs, very, very popular. There's a space constraint between the radiator and the fans, so it's very important what we choose here. Now, we basically use Billet Specialties, and I'm just going to abbreviate these, March Performance, and CVF Racing, Concept 1, Vintage Air, and I'm sure I'm probably forgetting others, but we have a ton of different options. Every one of these has billet finish, black and aluminum finish. The options are endless, but as far as a price standpoint, sorry about my phone, we're busy. Let's just focus that it was every one of these items right here. The price is going to include a thermostat housing, likely a power steering reservoir and lines if you need all of that stuff. So it will include that along with installation and dyno testing. People wonder, why would we dyno test this? Well, we want to make sure that the alternator charges. We want to make sure the power steering pump's not leaking, water pump's not leaking, and we get a true power result when we're running the accessories. So this, with AC, power steering, everything, probably range from $2,500 to $3,500, and I'll say plus, depending on if it's a supercharged application for LS. Some of those pulley kits get up there in price, but again, all about quality and fitment. So now we'll take it to what's really not a group, but moves us into the rest of the package. If I stopped here, this is what I would call a turnkey engine. Next, we'll move on to what makes it the ultimate turnkey package. Okay, so this isn't really going to be in a group, and primarily we've left the Flywheel or Flexplate out of the group and the bolts and the starter. Mainly the reason is you may already have that stuff. You may be going with an automatic or a manual, so it just made more sense to leave them out, but we will add it based on what your wants or needs are. So obviously if it's a manual transmission, it's going to be a Flywheel, and if it's a automatic, it'll be a Flexplate. But this leaves it open-ended too. Do you want a lightweight Flywheel? Do you want an aluminum one? So there's a lot of different options there, and while we're quoting, our sales staff has the ability to pull that line item and pull up whatever flywheel you might want. Same thing as all this stuff up here. The intake, maybe we want a dual plane, maybe we want a single plane. This allows us, our structure has allowed us to rapidly quote these and give you various options very quickly. Really don't need to throw any pricing here, but we don't use any cheap stuff. I mean, you're either going to pay for it now or pay for it later. And nobody likes to do things twice, at least from my perspective. So starters, POWERMASTer, high speed, high torque, good flywheels, SFI approved for safety reasons, and then good flywheel bolts. We can't make 700 to 1,000, 2,000 horsepower and not have good hardware holding this stuff together. So that's kind of your, we'll say, turnkey engine package. Then we move on to the manual transmission or automatic transmission package. Okay, so one of the things I'll point out here is a lot of this stuff on this side we have very little control over, we'll say. So it falls a lot on the manufacturer that we choose to deal with. If you don't know, we build custom cars in-house too, so we can't choose a cooling system that won't cool correctly or a fuel system that just will not flow enough. We will have problems internally if we did that. So it's very important that you understand when we chose the companies to work with here that they're reputable. They have the same type of business model that we do. So for instance, manual transmissions, we'll get right into basically what is that going to include. It's going to include basically the trans itself. We use a lot of Tremex. It's going to include the bell housing. Let me step over here. So the bell housing, that's a SFI steel, QuickTime basically. We use a lot of QuickTime. You're going to have your clutch, which is going to be McLeod. Usually we're going to do a 2-disc or dual disc clutch. That is mainly for pedal effort. Then we get into, you know, all the small items, pilot bearings, release bearings. Glad my spelling's not too bad. Cross members, mounts, everything minus the drive shaft. What we want you guys to do is measure that correctly. Couple things here. You want to make sure drive line angle is correct, but we want to measure for the drive shaft at the end. It makes no sense to send you a drive shaft when who knows what rear suspension or rear end you're using. So to give you an idea of price, manual trans package, $5,500 to $6,500. Automatics, on the other hand, a lot of people today are going to use an overdrive transmission. Chances are it's going to be electronic, which most likely is going to be controlled by our EFI system. So, that being said, the cost of your $1,500 Turbo 350, those days are kind of gone. So if we're saying a 4L60 transmission with a torque converter, dipstick, fluid cooler, everything to install it in the vehicle, you're probably going to still be in that $5,000 to $6,000 range. So this is just to give you an idea how quickly, you know, it can add up. You know, so we'll kind of get there near the end. So we'll move on to our cooling and our fuel system. All right, so cooling system first. We use today a lot of brushless fans, and once again we'll go back, the EFI controls that, so we got full control over the temperature of that motor. You're going to find when you use a good radiator and good fan system that you'll have the ability to hear it cycle, or if it's PWM controlled, it's going to slow down or speed up. If you hear it cycling, you know the efficiency is good. But what that includes is basically going to be the radiator, the fans, and your temp control, which would include wiring, relays, as well as your overflow tank, whoops, and a cap. So everything except the upper and lower hose, that may come in the future. Generally, where are we at? About $1,000 to $1,500 for that. So the fuel system, we really primarily use Aeromotive. And we're going to really encourage you to do an in-tank style fuel pump, no matter if it's carbureted or it's EFI. That's to keep all the fuel in motion. We can avoid vapor lock and boiling problems that occurred today because of the fuel quality. So, plus, an in-tank pump is going to run cooler, it's going to run quieter, and it's going to surely last a whole lot longer. And again, this is all about spending your money well and not having to do it a second time. So, fuel system is going to include the tank, and likely is going to have, with the pump in it, it's also going to have the sender for the gauge. We add to that the regulator, and that would either be a low pressure or a high pressure if we're doing carburetor or fuel injection. And we've got a gauge, so we can set the pressure. We can substitute that for a transducer. That would be if we were doing EFI. We have all the lines and fittings, and this would be a, controversy there on price, rubber line versus braided stainless. It is more expensive, but a fuel leak can cause your stuff to burn to the ground, so it's not worth cheaping out on lines. So all the lines and fittings are included, and then the last thing is going to be the wiring harness and a relay. So these systems, everything, once again, fully customizable, but you're going to look at about $1,200 to $1,500 on your average systems. We're not talking about power in 2,000, 3,000 horsepower here. This is average street cars up to about 1,000 horsepower. I will throw in, we do build our own fuel tanks if a guy wants, a custom design tank that he can't find anywhere. So we'll move on to the last items that aren't grouped together at all, and these are all vehicle specific. Alright, so the first thing is going to be headers and exhaust. We use a ton of different companies. Hooker, Doug's, FPA for the Ford guys, Ford Powertrain, awesome. Couldn't tell you how many people give us feedback that one stands amazing to work with, the stuff fits, and it functions. So headers and exhaust, or if you just want headers and mufflers, we'll basically orchestrate that. We also use Stainless Works and many others out there. I hate to leave anybody out, but for the sake of this video and keeping it short, generally I'm going to say 1,000 to 1,500. Now that's a little on the high side. Some of your Doug stuff will be down in the 750 range, but it gives you an idea of expectation. Wiring harness, American Auto Wire. We use a lot of those, so if you needed that, we can supply it probably 750 to 1,000 roughly on most. Gauges, we do everything from Autometer to Dakota Digital, several options there. Say again, 750 to 1,000. Under dash system, so we've given you a pulley kit, and it's got the right AC compressor, already has oil in it. You need the under dash system to update the car from, say, an R12 to a R134A. We can supply you the under dash system, minus the compressor and brackets and pulleys, because we already have them. Those systems generally are going to be about $1,300 to $1,500. And again, everything's optional, so it can go up from there, but Classic Auto Air, Vintage Air, we're a dealer for all of those. Suspension and steering, that's a big one. Gosh, Detroit Speed, Chris Alston Chassis Works, Ride Tech, Hotchkiss, any one that you can think of that's pretty mainstream, we carry it. So you want to talk about suspension and purchase it through us, we're happy to talk about it and provide it. Same thing on the brakes, Bayer, Willwood, and just some of your general OEM replacement stuff. We cover that. Really won't give you a price on this because the range could be $2,500 to $15,000. We offer chassis from Roadster Shop, Art Morrison. There's so many others out there, Roth Speed. And that's what leads us into the anything else category. So we get people that literally have a dream car they've wanted, but they don't even have the car. We can source one that's used as a roller, or a complete body, a Danacorn, brand new body, panels to fix the current body you have. And I said panels, but sheet metal as well, seats and interior, lighting. And then, heck, you've went that far, down here at the bottom, I just wrote complete builds. As I may have mentioned before, we build cars here regularly, and they can range from a general partial, say, install at 10 grand to well into $500,000. We have what you need. All right, so what I did was just erase a spot here so I could show you kind of the cost breakdown of the ultimate package, right? And it's really to show you that the base engine, in some cases, doesn't have a lot of bearing on the total cost of your project or what you purchase from us. So 347, for example, I picked it, I made it carbureted, I took the lower end of all the numbers I showed you, and roughly speaking, don't get your calculators out, it was roughly $24,000. So the EFI upgrade, really at this level, does that 26 look that bad? Especially when you want it to run and drive, have good street manners, you don't want the thing smelling like raw fuel and your wife's in there complaining, or maybe it's your wife's car and you're in there and don't like raw fuel, I don't know. But it's worth it. Now, take that same, all this stuff stays very, very close to the same in cost as far as what I've given you for an example. So we take our 582, obviously it's almost double, or is double, the price of the small block Ford. So the same deal comes out to 28 carbureted or 30 grand EFI. So it just goes to show you how quickly that stuff adds up. What I erased here was our suspension and steering. Let's just say we had a Roadster Shop chassis added to this order. A lot of their chassis are going to be from 20 to 30K. Now you've got $60,000 and you probably haven't made one cut or one weld yet on the vehicle. So that leads us into the complete builds. Why are they approaching $100,000+? Well, this is why. Good labor ain't cheap, and cheap labor ain't all that good. So just keep that in mind. You will get what you pay for. And if you make the mistake and choose a company that's a little lackluster, don't hesitate to call us. We'll still help you out and we'll try to get you in the right direction. So just to wrap all this up, this is a very busy time for us. I hope you made it this far in the video. It's very important to give us clear, concise detail to the best of your ability, and we can turn a quote around without even talking to you. But I do promise I would like to speak with every individual customer that's ready to place an order. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to hearing from you.